Hello, welcome once again to Leto's Law. I'm Steve Leto. Quick question people ask me all the time. Police officer pulls you over. You've been driving. You're operating a motor vehicle in one of the 50 states. And he says, I would like to see your driver's license. Hand it over. The question is, do you have to hand it over or can you merely show it to them? And this is an interesting question because many states follow the same idea that Michigan does. And it says that you merely must display your driver's license to the officer. So let's talk about this because it's important, but it's also, I don't think, as big of a deal as most people make it out to be. But I'll explain. So Michigan talks about driver's licenses and your need to have one in the Michigan compiled laws, the blue books behind me. And I know a lot of people, we've discussed before whether or not you need an operator's license to drive a vehicle in America. And you do. If you're on a public roadway operating a motor vehicle. I've done entire videos on that, so don't argue here about that. Go argue elsewhere. On my other video, maybe. But possession of operator's or chauffeur's license. And I'm generally talking about operator's licenses. I mean, I've known people who've had chauffeur's licenses, but it's basically addressing that as a catch-all. But the operator's license is what we're talking about here, the driver's license. MCL 257-311 says, the licensee shall have his or her operator's or chauffeur's license in his or her immediate possession at all times when operating a motor vehicle and shall display the same upon demand of any police officer who shall identify himself or herself as such. So there's several elements here. And the first one is that you are required to have it either on you or nearby you as you're operating the motor vehicle. So technically speaking, if you're out driving around and you're a licensed operator, you've got a driver's license, but you forgot it at home. Technically speaking, you're violating the law if you're out driving without it on you, okay? But we all know a police officer wants to, can ask you, who are you, identify you. I know my driver's license number off the top of my head. I can tell it to them. They can look it up that way, or they can run my name and they can find it that way. So they can discern whether or not you are a licensed operator. But the point is that you are technically required to have it on you. And then it says, the officer shall identify himself or herself as such. So a person walks up to you, not wearing a uniform, and says, can I see your driver's license? And you say, no. And they walk away and they come back and give you a ticket and they say, I'm a police officer. Well, but I've never heard of somebody actually encountering a police officer who didn't identify themselves as such, asking to see the license. But they put that in there just to make sure that everyone's covered. However, it says here that you shall display the same upon demand of any police officer. So shall display. Display means to show it to somebody. You must show it to them. Now, it does not say you shall furnish it to them, hand it to them, give it to them, relinquish it from your own possession into theirs. And we've talked before about how they write laws, how they draft statutes. And when they use a specific word such as display, when they could have said you shall provide it to them, well, display means that you do not have to give up possession of it. But display does mean that you have to show it to them, and presumably you have to show it to them in a way that they can actually see it. So I've had people tell me, they say, well, Steve, if I'm driving down the road, cop pulls me over, and I want to give him a hard time, I can crack my window this much, speak to the officer through the little crack in the window, and then when they ask to see my license with the window here, I can just say, here, there you go, and show it to them on the other side of the glass. Now, it's true, a police officer might be able to take a flashlight at night, looking through the glass without getting a glare on it, and be able to read enough of the license to where they can then go back and verify it's a good license. But of course, we've all seen people whose driver's licenses have gotten beaten up. They carry it in their back pocket, not a wallet. Over a few years, it gets all mangled. It's gone through the washing machine a couple times. You hold that up 6 inches from the glass and go, there you go. If the police officer can't read it, I suspect they're going to say, can you please hand it to me so I can read it for myself? Now, you can then say, well, hey, I talked to this fancy pants a lawyer on YouTube, and he said that all I've got to do is display it. Display the same upon demand. Display it. I am displaying it to you. But clearly the intent of this statute, displaying it, means you have to show it to them in a way that where they can read it. Otherwise, you could say, cop, here, I'm displaying it to you over here. My arm is off camera, I know. But my wingspan is about 6 feet, right? So let's suppose I leaned into my car And I held it up against the other window, but facing this way, and said, there you go. You can see it, can't you? I'm displaying it. Well, obviously, that's not functionally displaying it to where the officer can read it. So the idea of displaying it means showing it to them so they can read it. So would a police officer technically say that he cannot see the license if you're holding it up to the glass, and he actually can? Okay. Well, if he actually can, then you're displaying it, you're probably okay. You have to remember, though, a lot of these arguments that you can have at the side of the road, you might be right. But let's suppose that you actually say, hey, you know something? I'm going to take this driver's license. I don't have one on me, so I'll use Trek West Photography's sticker, which is still sitting here. And you put it right up against the window. You say, there you go. There you go. You can read that. There you go. Now, the police officer, all he's got to do is say, I can't read it. Whether he or she can or not is not the point, because if you say no, that's it. That's the best one to do for you. Police officer can whip out his ticket book and write you a ticket and said, failure to display license. And that's actually against the law, because it says here you've got to display your license. Now you're going to say, Steve, I displayed my license. Yes, you did. And the police officer says that you didn't because you couldn't read it. And this argument's not going to get settled to the side of the road. It's going to get settled in court. Do you want to go to court to prove a point, with air quotes, which I know people don't like? Or do you want to resolve it at the side of the road? And by resolve it, make it with a happy ending where you just leave, as opposed to having to go someplace later with an appearance ticket. And ideally, I'm assuming you'd rather not have to go to court. So your best bet is to simply say, there's my license. And they really say, I can't read it or can't see it. Really? Okay, fine. And stick it through the little crack in the window. But my argument would be that you're pretty much fighting a losing battle. So I did a video on how to behave at the roadside when pulled over by a police officer. And it's a popular video, but I still get flack from people who say, Steve, I can't believe you're suggesting we all bow down to the police. When common courtesy would say that they ask you for a driver's license, you say, here, and hand it to them. Let the officer look at it and hand it back to you. What are you scared of? Are you scared they're going to take your license? I've always gotten my license back. I've never heard of anybody actually having a police officer steal their license before. I'm sure it's happened somewhere, but I've never heard of it. So what's the harm in handing it to them? But you want to get technical? Technically speaking, it says display. And my understanding, and I've seen this statute in other states, I haven't checked all 50, but many states simply say display the license, show the license. And in that case, you're fine. But now here's the question. If you don't display the license because you don't literally have anything in your hands, the officer walks up and says, do you have a license? And you say, for whatever reason, I can't display one at the moment. It could be that you have one, just not on you. You left it at home. As pointed out, that's already a violation of the law. Police officer can write you a ticket for no ops, and no operator license on person, as they often call it. It could be that you do not have a driver's license at all. Never applied for one. You had one, but it was revoked or suspended. But you don't have a legal, fully operational operator's license at the moment in time. For whatever reason, you don't have one. So the police officer can write you up for the no ops, but he could also write you up for driving on a suspended, if that's the case, or driving while revoked, or whatever it might be in your state, if the officer figures that out once you tell him who you are, assuming you tell him the truth. And of course, it could be that you've got one on your person, but you just simply refuse to show it because you're one of those people. You think they've got no right to ask for it. And you're going to lose that argument because, like I said, Michigan law says that if you're driving, you need to show the license if you got one. And if you don't got one, you shouldn't be driving. Okay? So, in case you're curious, there's another statute on point, 257-901A, and it talks about violation of what I just talked about, 257-311. And there is a provision where they'll waive the fines and costs for you to have been driving without that permit, without the license on your person. And it says, if a person has received a citation for violation of Section 311, the court shall waive any fine and costs upon receipt of certification by a law enforcement agency that the person, before the appearance date on the citation, has produced his or her operator's or chauffeur's license, and that the license was valid on the date the violation of Section 311 occurred. So you get pulled over to the side of the road. For whatever reason, you don't show it to the cop. Either you don't have it on you, or you refused on a matter of principle but you had a valid license. You just didn't show it to the police officer. Or let's say you held it up to the window and the police officer said, I can't read that. And you said, I don't care. And he said, okay, fine. Or your windows are so darkly tinted that he can't see it, whatever it is. You could then theoretically go to a law enforcement agency and get it certified that you actually had a valid license. You just didn't have it available to provide to the police officer, whatever the case might be. So if you received a citation for violation of 311, the court shall waive the fines and costs upon receipt of certification that you actually had that and it was valid at the time. Why would you go to all that trouble if you were doing that on purpose? I don't know. But if you actually had one, just not on you, you forgot your license or your wallet, whatever, then you go and get it certified and they'll waive that portion of the ticket. Quite often, police officers will write this in conjunction with other tickets, meaning that they pulled you over for speeding, they ask to see your license, and you don't have one on you for whatever reason. You'll get the ticket for no ops on person and for speeding. You go to court and you get the speeding ticket dealt with one way, and if you had a valid license at the time, just not on you, you can then present that to court and they'll often take care of that portion of the ticket as well. But again, like I said, the law says that you have to display the license, not that you actually have to hand it to them. But in my mind, that's a distinction. I'm not really sure how useful that is, but I know people out there who, as a matter of principle, say, Steve, the law says display, so all I'm going to do is display. And in that case, I say, great, go right ahead. And understand that a police officer will probably view that as you being obstinate, you being stubborn. You have a right to be stubborn? Absolutely. This is America. USA, USA. You can be as stubborn as you want at the roadside. God-given right. I think it's in the Bible somewhere. You have a right to be stubborn. Once in a while, as an attorney, I'll explain to you things you are allowed to do and things you've got rights to do are not always necessarily the best choices in life if the cost-benefit analysis would show that by being polite, you could get farther. But again, I'm not Emily Post. I'm not here trying to make everyone in the world polite. I simply explain the law to you. And if you choose not to follow it or not to follow my advice, go right ahead. But at least you're doing so in an educated fashion, I hope. Questions or comments, put them below. Otherwise, talk to you later. Bye.